Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this particular podcast, I have entitled it, How to Have a Long-Distance Relationship. In the idea of talking about this particular topic, what comes to mind is, in general, when we talk about relationships, we are generally talking about romantic relationships and the proximity of having that person next to you. That's always a convenience. And for some people, it's a luxury. But the question comes, how do you have a relationship with someone who is geographically several miles, if not hours, in terms of maybe being across the country or maybe even being in another country? How do you bridge that and still keep the relationship interesting? Well, I can tell you, number one, it's definitely somebody who's going to be exceptionally special to you, to want to brave some of the unknowns when you have a relationship with someone who isn't there with you all the time. I can say it's a challenge to begin a relationship that's long distance. But if you've had relationships and you have not necessarily had successful ones with people who are near you geographically, you might be more willing to try something that's different. And having a long distance relationship is definitely that. It's different in some aspects because you don't necessarily have that person close to you when you want them. There are things that you can do to sort of give you some face time. There's the advent of technology nowadays gives us the possibility of literally looking at them when we're talking to them. There's always been a telephone, and sometimes that has not always been inexpensive, but it is a way to communicate with people. The other thing to consider is if you have a relationship that has long since been established, it might be a little easier to have a long distance relationship with someone you're already comfortable with, because the prospect of spending time apart is a part of your discussion prior to you probably taking whatever it is that's going to put distance between you. Let's say, for example, if you are taking a job in a different location and you're going to be apart for days, if not weeks, you would most likely discuss how the communication is going to happen. Or in the midst of, if the finances are there, one partner may make trips to go visit the person who's away, and that sort of bridges the distance. But like I've said, nowadays with the technology, at least you can get FaceTime, and that usually helps with the loneliness that may come about. Now, some of the things that happen in the absence of your other partner is you tend to learn how there was a dependence on your other partner. And sometimes it's hard to even realize what you're going to miss until the person is gone. Clearly, you're giving an attempt at it simply because you love that person and you want to figure out how we can still make our relationship survive and be successful when there's an absence. So I'm talking about the subject from this aspect of we want it to work, how we can make it work, but some of the things that you're going to run into. And the thought of intimacy when you have an absence like that is a thorny one, because intimacy, as oftentimes we discuss it, it has a very physical component to it. It's the touch. It's the looking at the person and being able to do things together. Now, when that is not there at your convenience, then it's sort of rationed, so to speak. So you have to take advantage of the time when you have it, and that's where planning comes into effect. You're going to plan your time together, and you have something to look forward to, whether it's intimacy, whether in terms of physical intimacy, if it's having time to go out on a date, those kinds of things, you have to know that they're still important to you, and discuss these with your partner in advance, how you're going to go about making those things still be part of the relationship, because there are obviously things that aren't going to be there. Now, some people that, as I talked about, if you have a relationship that's already established and you're going to have to transition into it being a long distance relationship, I've covered some of those things. Now, if you're brand new at a relationship and you're going to want to try to figure some of these things out, you need to know what you're going to be stepping into. Number one, they're not terribly successful for people who are just starting out in relationships, somebody who hasn't really had a lot of relationship experience, because the simple answer is this: when somebody is long distance, it's not always that absence makes the heart grow fonder, but when you're young, you tend to be distracted by lots of other things. You tend to notice other people more in your sphere, more in your proximity. And until you've had a lot of relationship experience, which teaches you how to filter out all of those distractions, it's going to be real difficult. So there are personality types that I think that are not very good at having a long distance relationship. That is, people who are insecure, because they tend to be the nervous type, and every sign to them is a sign that the relationship is not working out. And insecure people, just by their nature, being really twitchy, it's really hard to keep them in the same emotional space for very long. And it could be exhausting. And I'm not saying that person does not want to be in the relationship, but an insecure person is not necessarily a good candidate for something like this. It's just too much of a challenge. Jealous individuals tend not to be very good at being in a long distance relationship, because you have the opportunity when you're away to be in your own space and to be by yourself, but then your mind oftentimes can start running away with you. And those jealous thoughts can overwhelm people who aren't good at managing themselves, managing their emotions, managing their feelings. And passive aggressive types don't tend to do well with this. And all of those things tend to work around that same idea of insecurity. If you notice, there's a common theme there. Jealous people, passive aggressive types, there's a lot of insecurity in those characteristics. But and people who tend to suffer from a lot of depression. Generally, the reinforcements, the reassurances that you could do in a long distance relationship, that is having the time on the phone, doing the face chat, those kinds of things, those can placate people for a while. But you have to be really strong in your own character and your own personality to be able to deal with a long distance relationship where, and again, the long distance part means that you're not going to have that person close to you. You're not going to have access to that physical person very often. Now, as I mentioned, if you are more established, you're going to be a little more successful. And if you're not the jealous type, you have a much better chance of making a long distance thing work. And I say that when you've had a relationship for a while and you are establishing, say, a different phase of this, for whatever reasons you're going to have the long distance, whether it's because of a job, because you might have to relocate, you might have to care for a family member and have to travel. So it's not about relocating forever and ever. It's just more of a temporary thing. Then communicating with your partner about what's going on, about what you believe the expectations are, and then doing regular updates. And it just seems that what we learn to do in long distance relationships is really take advantage of the time when we're together. You tend to celebrate your relationship. You tend to celebrate your partner. And you might even relearn the art of writing letters. How special something like that is to someone. I mean, physically writing a letter where you mail it and they get it. Those things are very sweet. It's a lost art, I would share. Poetry. I think when you learn to reaffirm the value of somebody in your life, whether they're close or whether they're far, that remains very, very special. That creates good memories. And far be it that long distance relationships tend to be the kinds of things that are a catalyst for this kind of bump, meaning bump in a good direction. You tend to show the emotion. You tend to celebrate your partner, make them really ensure that they know that they're important to you. And I think a long distance relationship has its challenges, but there is definitely room to make these things grow and work. And for people who are just starting out, know that it is full of challenges. If you are young, it's probably more challenging. If you are older and you, like I said, you've had relationships, you tend to do better at filtering out a lot of the distractions that could pull you away from someone. And the more established relationships, you know more about your partner. And I think there are a lot less insecurities that crop up when you know your partner. But if you don't, then you're left in that discovery phase, and that can be a very, very difficult hurdle. So that's my input on that. Thank you. I'm going to go to a commercial break, and then I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hi there, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. In the last segment, I was talking about long-distance relationships and how to keep them going, and some of the pitfalls and some of the kinds of people that probably aren't good candidates for long-distance relationships. But I try to keep it positive and giving you a way to make them work. Now, you got a situation where you want to find out about a person. So this is somebody you have more in your proximity. And you know what? What better way to do that than to actually spend some quality time? And what can we do? Take a trip. Go on like a mini vacation. Start out, make it easy. Make it a day trip, and then you can build from there. I had this comes up because I have a friend she and her girlfriend, they just went on a trip to Vegas and found it to be one of the more stressful things that they had experienced. Now, what I find is interesting about this, now at work, they seem to just hang out together. They take their breaks together and they talk about their boyfriends and where everything is going with that. But the minute the two of them went out on a trip, and they spent about 4 or 5 days together, apparently this was kind of something that it didn't work out as well. And what I did is I kind of asked them, I says, okay, well, what's going on? And they shared a few details, or at least one person in particular shared some details. And I just found it not surprising. I kind of like to do the psychology thing so I can understand some things would not work out. But what surprised me is that they didn't know this about themselves before they went out on this trip. But there and again, that's why you go on trips, to have fun. And so I'm going to stretch this and bend this away so that if you want to know what it's going to be like to be with someone, maybe for a relationship, something a little more intimate than just hanging out, buddy, spend some time with them. Obviously, you want to choose well to begin with. You want to pick somebody that you really like. I mean, it's not just any old person, but somebody you're really thinking about having something of more significance with. Spend some time. Pick something that you two can do together. Let's say if you want to do a day trip, you can plan something around town maybe, or maybe take a drive together where it's the two of you. And I want to emphasize that. I mean, you can do part of a group thing and consider yourself a couple, that might be fun. That might take some of the stress out of just the two of you being together. But I think I want you to understand that what I'm really trying to emphasize here is the two of you. So that's why taking a trip together is a better idea, so that you get a sense of, number one, how you plan things. Do you plan it? Do you let the other person plan it? Do you do it together? Who drives? Do you drive? Do you share the driving duties? Or are you a person that's comfortable with letting the other person drive? See, some people have, I'm going to describe it this way, some people have control issues, so they want to be in charge of a lot of things. And if that's something that you are comfortable with, letting the other person be in charge of a lot of things, sometimes that's actually a relief, that you can trust that they will manage a lot of the things. And that's a good thing to learn about somebody, because in the long term, it's these types of skills are what are going to show up in the relationship. And if they can manage their money, if they can manage their time, if they can manage stress, all of these things tend to show up when you have one-on-one time and extended one-on-one time. See, this is really important, because when you know these kinds of things, then you kind of get a sense of the person you're dealing with. All of these things are manageable when you're not being tested, because it's not out there. You're not dealing with stressful situations. And I liken this one very much. And it's, how do people handle themselves in traffic jam? See, I mean, nobody wants to be in a traffic jam, because you're obviously trying to go somewhere. So what happens? You get stuck and things happen. If you have a deadline, and this actually happened to me, it was an illustration. I was trying to I was going to San Francisco one evening, had a friend in Oakland. We were going from Oakland to San Francisco. I am habitually late. So this particular episode, I did everything in my power to get to Oakland in a reasonable amount of time, and then give us time to get to San Francisco, because we were going to take a little evening cruise. I had already had the tickets in hand, ready to go. And wouldn't you know, the trip from Oakland to San Francisco took exceedingly long. And when I got to San Francisco, the traffic was gridlock much of the way going along the wharf, and I had to find parking, and then had to get out of the car and then run to the gate and then get on the boat. And let me tell you, I got the car parked and the ferry was backing off from the pier. Well, already having had my reputation for being late, I really felt bad, and I didn't necessarily handle it the best. I didn't throw a tantrum, but I was definitely frustrated, because I felt for this date, I was looking like I didn't do everything that I could to manage my time very well. Well, she handled it great. I mean, she must have did some praying or something, meditating, because she handled it great. And it really made me feel a lot better. I felt like it wasn't my fault that we missed it. I mean, granted, she was giving the directions to the wharf, because she knew the Bay Area exceedingly well. But it was still, I was trying to show that I was better at managing my time, because I was doing, in this particular case, a long distance relationship, if you will. And, you know, when you live across town and you're a few minutes late, and then, you know, that might annoy people. But when you're living out of town, you tend to have to learn how to be okay with the times, because things might take a little longer to get started. Certainly you don't want to be an hour or 2 hours late every time. That's not going to work. That can really annoy people. But in the experience that I was having, what helped me know something was how well she managed that situation. And it made me appreciate her that much more, because generally I'm really good. And I'm really good at managing my own things. But when the impact of what happened, meaning we were going to miss that boat, was going to impact her as well, then I really felt bad. And I learned a lesson there. Remain calm anyway in the face of the situation. and you can help the other person remain calm. So that's a lesson for you about how to handle stress. And given the opportunity to be in that situation, not only did she learn, but more importantly, I learned as well how to be a better me. And that's a benefit. Look, I'm going to take a moment. We're going to do a break here, and I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. In the last segment, I was talking about how to spend time with someone and then develop a sense of who they are in those moments when you're going to spend time with them. Because when you think about having a long-term relationship, you want to obviously know something not only about the person, but when I say not just their looks and you know, there are lots of things that guys do, and I crack up at this. Women, if you don't know, this is one of the things that a guy will do. If he wants to know what you're going to look like in 20 years, he goes to look at your mom and he figures, okay, if I look at mom looks hot. This is what I've got going into the future. That's great. Well, there's something else that you want to know about a person besides what they're going to look like in 20 years. But in that 20 years, what kind of person are they going to be? And you had to spend a little bit of time together in order to figure this out. So I'm suggesting that you go out on a little day trip, at least to start with. And then as you become more familiar with each other, then you can plan time more and more. So what you're getting here is you're getting an opportunity to have quality time. And, you know, hint, hint, this is a good way to make good on your effort to learn about each other, to determine if this is something you really want to put your time in. So planning a trip, and as I discussed, there's the driving duties. I mean, do we share? Do we let one person be in charge of something? And so this is where you get to learn something about the personality types, because some people don't mind somebody else taking control. Some people really don't mind, and other people really like to be in charge and they don't want to give up control. And if both of you are type A kinds of individuals, the one thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a power struggle. And that is like kryptonite to a relationship. It's going to ruin it. It's going to destroy it. It's going to take the energy out of it. So in a situation like that, what you have to learn to do is you have to divide the duties. And you have to let the person who's in charge of that particular duty be in charge of that particular duty. You learn that people who tend to work well together are people who have sort of like these different personality types. You got a person that's a real strong character, real strong personality type, and somebody that isn't so strong-willed, somebody who's a little more flexible, a little more pliable. And it's not suggesting that one person dominates the other individual. It's suggesting that you have one person that really wants to be in charge of something and the other person being okay with it. So you can negotiate those differences and have an understanding about it that doesn't have anything to do with whether someone is being passive. And I want that understood, because I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that someone has to always be passive or let the more dominant, stronger person be in charge of everything, because that's not what I'm advocating, because that's not evenly yoked, so to speak. What you have to learn to do is you have to learn to share the duties. Now, I think in discussing things, you may find that one person may be better suited to do certain things. Say, for example, if you like to drive because you really enjoy driving, you can handle traffic jams. Or if you're really good at navigating things, or it's real familiar to you, yeah, that person might be better suited to drive. Or maybe you like to sit and do sightseeing. If you're a person that drives a lot on your own, maybe you would be much happier being able to look at scenery. You see? So when you sit down and talk about these things, it's interesting what comes out of the conversation when you really get down to thinking about how can we make this work? And there's so many variables, and I encourage you to really give it some thought, because it's in those moments when you can plan your itinerary, you can plan your future, you can plan how you want the relationship to go and get the result that you want. See, that's the neat thing. You can call for it, you can declare it, and it'll happen. And it's in the negotiation, and every relationship has to learn the art, the skill of negotiating. And it's in that where you learn the give and take, and it's the appreciation in both partners about how the feelings are going. If you sense that your partner really has a lot invested in something, and if they really want to do something, and you go along with it out of love, out of commitment, out of devotion, I would hope that your partner could see that in you and really find that you're doing it as an act of love. That is appreciation. And if you have somebody in your life who is really that devoted to you, who wants to share those kinds of things, I suggest you give it a try. Do whatever you can to make it work. And vice versa. This is how you build a relationship connection. Now, I should also point out that because things are going well, or you have that expectation that things are going well, if you have a little upset, that is not the end of the road. Because here's something I'm going to tell you. Every relationship has their upsets. Every one of them. It's really about how you handle that conflict, that upset, is what's really going to determine what happens next. You see, some people dwell on the problem and it just sort of exacerbates the issue. It doesn't let it settle. It just sort of festers and it simmers, and it just really upsets what you're trying to accomplish. So I think what's important is that you remember why you're there in the first place. And I think that would help re-establish the good connection. Now, if you're finding out that you are with somebody who doesn't seem to possess that skill, well, you could suggest that they might work on that. And honestly, that's giving you information that you need to know. You might be, like I shared when I first started out this segment, there were the two ladies who were great at work, but they went on a mini vacation together of a few days, and turned out that it was, half a disaster. So if you're out and you're enjoying some time with your friends or your significant other, let's say we're keeping it one-on-one here, and you have a little bit of an upset, well, look forward to having a recovery and having a good time. But if it seems like they can't get back on track, well, there you go. You've got some information about them. And, it might be worth having a discussion about it when the time passes and we can be a little more calm, a little more objective about what went on. I think the fear when the upsets happen is that you think, in the case of my own example, when I missed the ferry going out for a trip, as I feel like I'm at fault. And I think there's a guilt thing that's happening there, because I had some old stuff that I was trying to show that I had dealt with. So in the case of having something that's an issue that's behind the scenes, when those kinds of things come up, it's important to be able to talk about them, get those out in the open. And that's one way to kind of help smooth over the case. And in the interest of those situations where you're learning that the person really isn't a good travel partner, well, at least you learn that before you spent the rest of your life trying to figure that out. So there you go. Hopefully you're able to take this and make some good use of it. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.